All right, let's jump right in. Today, we are breaking down a really critical document for anyone who's serious about medical aesthetics, China's new 2026 NMPA guidelines for hyaluronic acid fillers. Seriously, you should think of this as the official playbook for getting into one of the fastest growing markets on the entire planet. So, with all that opportunity just sitting there, the big question, the multi-billion-dollar question really, is how do you actually win? How do you get your product through the hoops and into the hands of doctors in China? Well, the answer is kind of simple, but it's definitely not easy. It all starts, and honestly, it ends, with mastering this new playbook from the National Medical Products Administration. The NMPA. And this isn't just about ticking some boxes on a form. It's about really getting the strategy behind their rules. Okay, so let's crack open this playbook, shall we? We're going to walk through 5 key chapters. First, we'll cover how you even define your product. Then, how you survive what I call the gauntlet of testing. After that, we'll look at proving it in humans, the final word on labels, and then we'll wrap up by looking at the core principles that are driving this whole thing. First up, Chapter 1, Defining Your Product. Now I know this sounds like boring paperwork, but trust me, how you define your filler right at the very beginning, it dictates your entire regulatory journey. Getting this foundation right isn't just important, it's non-negotiable. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The NMPA has this concept called a registration unit. Think of it as one single submission. So you can bundle different fill volumes, maybe different needle types, all into one application. No problem. But, and this is a big but, the second you change a core component, like the HA concentration or the cross-linking method, boom, that's a completely separate submission, a whole new process. It really forces you to be strategic about your product lines from day one. And the level of detail they want is just incredible. I mean, look at this example from the guidelines. You have to list every single ingredient down to the milligram per milliliter. You even have to state exactly where your hyaluronic acid came from. Was it microbial fermentation or animal extraction? There is absolutely zero room for being vague. So the takeaway here is crystal clear. This initial definition, it's not just administrative busy work. It is the fundamental blueprint that's going to guide every single test, every clinical trial, and every marketing claim you hope to make later on. All right, so let's see how that blueprint leads us into Chapter 2, the gauntlet of testing. Because once you've defined your product, you then have to prove it's safe, stable, and actually works through this just absolute barrage of lab tests. This gauntlet really has 4 main pillars. You have to do a complete risk analysis of every potential hazard. You have to provide exhaustive research showing it performs as designed, then a massive biological evaluation to prove it's safe for the body, and finally, stability studies to back up whatever shelf life you claim. Each one of these is a huge project on its own. And when we talk about biocompatibility, the list of required tests is just exhaustive. I mean, the NMPA wants data on everything from cytotoxicity to sensitization, irritation, genotoxicity. The list just goes on and on. They are looking at every possible interaction your product could have with the human body over its entire life cycle. And speaking of safety, they are not messing around. Just look at this number on the screen, 10 to the power of -6. What in the world could that mean when we're talking about dermal fillers? It represents something called the Sterility Assurance Level, or SAL. And what it means is that the NPA demands that every single syringe has a 1 in a million chance, or less, of having a single viable microorganism on it after sterilization. 1 in a million. That is an incredibly high bar, and it tells you everything you need to know about their focus on patient safety. So, the bottom line for this chapter is pretty simple. The burden of proof is enormous. The NMPA doesn't care about your marketing slogans or what other regulators in other countries have said. They demand exhaustive, verifiable data. It is the only language they speak. So once you've conquered the lab and survived the gauntlet, you move on to Chapter 3, proving it works in actual humans. This is where all that performance and safety data has to be confirmed in the real world through rigorous clinical trials. And the key word here is specificity. If your clinical trial proves your filler works great for correcting, say, nasolabial folds, then that is the only thing you can claim it's for. You can't just get away with saying it's for facial wrinkles. The evidence has to directly support every single intended use you want to put on your label. It's a one-to-one match. So you can see the strategic implication here is massive, right? Your clinical trial design basically becomes your marketing playbook. You have to decide upfront exactly what you want to claim and then design a trial that proves it. Because what you test is, quite literally, what you will be allowed to sell. Full stop. And that leads us perfectly into Chapter 4, the final word on labels. All that data you have so painstakingly collected, from the chemistry lab, from the clinical trials, it all culminates in one final critical piece of communication: the product instructions and the label. And the NMPA is incredibly prescriptive about what these labels have to say. For instance, if your clinical trial only studied a single treatment, your label is required to state very explicitly that the safety of repeat treatments hasn't been verified. They also mandate these super clear, unambiguous warnings against high-risk, off-label uses. The guidelines literally suggest adding text just like this to prohibit use in areas like the breast, even if you think it's obvious. They are leaving absolutely nothing to chance. So the crucial point here is this: the NNPA does not see a product label as a piece of marketing. They see it as a legally binding risk management document. It's the final firewall protecting the patient from potential harm. So, after navigating all these chapters, from the initial definition and the gauntlet of testing to the trials and the labels, what is this playbook really all about? What are the core principles that are driving China's NPA? Well, it really all boils down to four main things. 1. Patient safety is the absolute top priority. 2. Every single claim has to be backed up by hard scientific data. 3. Risk must be controlled across the product's entire life cycle, from the raw materials to the final patient warnings. And 4, clarity and precision are everything. Ambiguity is just not an option. Which leaves us with one last big question to think about. You could look at this incredibly strict playbook and see it as a massive barrier to entry, just making it harder to get into the Chinese market. Or you could see it as a blueprint for building a safer, more rigorous, and ultimately a more trusted aesthetics industry for everyone. And the perspective you choose to take will probably define your success.
Thank you for watching this video. For more information, please reach out via email at info@whitneyconsulting.net or visit our website.